The stars had always held promise for humankind. For centuries, they had glimmered as unreachable lights in a velvet sky, beckoning dreamers and poets alike. Now, in the age of interstellar travel, they had become destinations. Humanity had spread beyond Earth, settling on the moons of gas giants, carving homes in the metal bones of asteroids, and raising cities beneath alien suns. It was not an empire. Humanity was still fractured in its politics, languages, and old rivalries, but there was a shared recognition, whispered across colonies and spacefaring vessels. They were no longer bound to a single world. The human story was larger now, stitched into the wider tapestry of the cosmos. That was when the sky began to burn. The first reports came from Vega Outpost, a mining colony that floated in the shadow of a crimson star. Its last transmission was nothing more than screams, broken static, and a flare of light captured by the outpost's automated sensors. A second colony, 3 jumps away, vanished within hours of the first. No warning, no demands, only silence where there had once been bustling human lives. Governments scrambled to understand what was happening. Some thought it was a catastrophic failure of fusion reactors, others whispered of piracy on a scale never before seen. But as the hours stretched into days, the truth revealed itself in the most brutal way imaginable. The alien fleet arrived in orbit above Ararat, the jewel of the frontier, a planet of emerald seas and sprawling settlements. Unlike the barren colonies, Ararat was heavily populated, its surface dotted with millions of human lives. From orbit, telescopes caught sight of the intruders for the first time. They were like nothing humanity had imagined. Their ships were vast crescents of living metal, their hulls shifting with an oily sheen that shimmered like scales. They moved with a grace that belied their size, gliding through the void as if space itself bent to accommodate them. And when they struck, it was with a fury that defied comprehension. The first bombardment was swift and merciless. Cities vanished beneath waves of molten rock as orbital strikes tore through the atmosphere. Entire districts burned in seconds. Refugee transports scrambled to flee the planet, but the alien vessels cut them down, ripping escape ships into glowing debris before they had cleared the sky. Humanity's defenders rallied. Ararat's orbital fleet, nearly 100 ships, rose to meet the invaders. They were diverse in design, products of different nations and corporations, but together they formed a shield of steel and determination. For a fleeting moment, hope flickered. It was extinguished in minutes. The alien warships moved with terrifying coordination, weaving through human formations and cutting them apart with beams of searing light. Human weapons struck back, kinetic rounds slamming into alien hulls, missiles detonating in fiery blossoms, but the enemy vessels shrugged off the blows as if they were nothing. Human fleets had fought pirates and each other for centuries, but they had never faced a foe like this. By the time the battle was over, the defenders of Ararat were ash. Only a handful of crippled vessels limped away, their crews broken and their hulls bleeding atmosphere. The planet below screamed in fire. Across human space, panic spread like a plague. Colonies sent desperate calls for aid, fleets scrambled to mobilize, and civilians watched in horror as images of burning cities flooded every channel. For the first time since stepping beyond Earth, humanity felt the crushing weight of insignificance. The aliens had not spoken a word. No communication, no ultimatum, no reason for their assault. To them, humanity seemed nothing more than vermin, infestation to be cleansed. And yet, even in the ashes of Ararat, defiance flickered. Among the wreckage of the orbital fleet, one ship managed to slingshot past the enemy blockade. It was a battered freighter-turned warship called the Resolute. Its captain, Elias Vera, was a man not bred for war, but hardened by necessity. He had lost half his crew in the initial barrage, but those who remained swore vengeance with every breath. They carried survivors from the planet's surface, farmers, miners, children crammed into the ship's narrow corridors. Their vessel creaked with strain, but it pushed onward, fleeing into the deep night with the promise of warning others. Captain Vera did not know if humanity could survive what was coming. He did not know if Earth itself would fall as easily as Ararat, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty: humans would not go quietly. The aliens believed them fragile. They believed the burning of a few colonies would break humanity's will. They could not have been more wrong, because humans had endured worse. They had torn themselves apart in wars, clawed their way out of famine and plague, risen from ruins time and again. Humanity's strength was not in its fleets or its weapons. It was in the unyielding refusal to surrender, the fire that burned brighter the more it was smothered. The weight of ashes would forge iron, and the galaxy was about to learn what it meant to awaken that fire. The battered vessel Resolute limped through the black, its engines coughing sparks into the void. Entire sections of its hull had been burned away by the alien assault, leaving gaping wounds sealed only by desperate welds and emergency plating. Inside, the air reeked of smoke, metal, and fear. The survivors huddled in silence along the narrow corridors, listening to the groans of their ship as it strained against the vacuum. Some were children wrapped in emergency blankets, their eyes wide and hollow. Others were hardened miners who had once broken stone with their hands, now sitting helplessly with bandaged limbs. None spoke much. The weight of what they had left behind pressed too heavily on them. Captain Elias Vera stood on the bridge, staring at the streaking stars beyond the viewport. His face was carved with exhaustion, his once proud uniform scorched and torn. He had seen countless battles between human factions, but never anything like Ararat. He had thought himself prepared for war. He had been wrong. "Status?" he asked, voice rough from smoke inhalation. His first officer, a wiry woman named Sarai Nadia, glanced up from a cracked console. "Life support is stable for now, but the reactors are running at half capacity. Weapons are gone, shields are gone. We are flying on prayers and duct tape, Elias." Elias nodded grimly. "How many souls on board?" 812. The number hung in the air like a stone. The Resolute had been built to house a crew of 200. Every corridor, every cargo bay, every maintenance shaft was now filled with survivors crammed shoulder to shoulder. The ship had become less a vessel and more a lifeboat. "Plot us a course to Helios Station," Elias ordered. "They need to know what's coming." Helios Station was a massive trade hub near the edge of human space, a place where fleets and freighters alike stopped to resupply. If the aliens struck there, the losses would cripple humanity's ability to respond. It had to be warned. The Resolute limped on, crawling through jump lanes, every transit shaking the vessel to its core. And always, on the edge of long-range sensors, the alien shadows lingered. The enemy was not done. News of Ararat's fall spread like wildfire. Entire networks broadcast the images of burning cities and shattered fleets, replayed until they burned into the collective memory of humanity. Governments panicked. Some ordered fleets to mobilize immediately. Others turned inward, barricading their colonies and refusing to answer distress calls. And still, the aliens came. They struck at Vega's orbitals, reducing refineries to molten slag. They descended upon Charon's belt, hunting miners through the rock fields like wolves. Every battle followed the same pattern: sudden arrival, overwhelming violence, silence. Not a word spoken, not a demand made. Human fleets fought back, and sometimes they even managed to bloody the invaders. There were stories whispered of corvettes ramming alien cruisers head-on, of fighter pilots diving into the enemy with their engines set to overload. Acts of suicidal courage that bought seconds of breathing space, nothing more, but seconds were enough. For every ship that was lost, survivors carried fragments of data. Recordings of alien weapons, sensor traces of their movements, samples of their strange, living metal. Humanity began to piece together the enemy, one shard at a time. They learned that the invaders' armor pulsed with self-repairing tissues, that their weapons drained immense amounts of energy before firing, that their coordination was too precise to be anything but shared thought. It was not victory, but it was survival, and survival was enough for the moment. The Resolute reached Helios Station battered but alive. The great station loomed ahead, a cathedral of steel and glass orbiting a dying star. Its spires glittered with light, its docks teemed with freighters and patrol ships. It was a city in the void, home to 500,000 souls. When the Resolute docked, chaos erupted. Thousands of refugees poured out, collapsing onto polished floors, weeping, screaming, clutching what little remained of their lives. The story spread instantly. Ararat had burned, and the aliens were coming. The leaders of Helios convened an emergency council. They gathered in the central chamber, a cavernous hall of white stone and holographic displays. Representatives from Earth, Mars, Luna, and the colonies all shouted over one another, voices rising in fear and accusation. "We cannot fight them," cried one delegate. "We must negotiate." "With what?" another shouted. "They do not speak, they slaughter. Then we retreat, we fall back to Earth and let the frontier burn. Cowardice will not save us." The debate raged, but Elias Vera spoke only once. He stood at the center of the chamber, his voice low and steady, yet carrying the weight of a man who had seen the fire firsthand. "They will come here," he said, "and when they do, no walls will be high enough. No retreat will be far enough. You cannot hide from a storm that spans the sky, you can only face it, and humanity must face this storm together." His words silenced the chamber, for a moment at least, but even as Helios argued, the storm drew near. It began with a flicker in the outer system. A mining vessel reported strange distortions near the jump gate. Then its signal went dead. Patrol ships scrambled to investigate. None returned. By the time the first alien vessels appeared on sensors, the station's outer defenses were already collapsing. Panic consumed Helios. Civilians swarmed the docks, desperate to flee. Fleets scrambled to form defensive lines, their crews bracing themselves for the oncoming tide. The station's weapons, massive cannons embedded in its spires, hummed to life. The aliens came like shadows torn from the void. Their crescent vessels slipped through space in perfect formation, their hulls shimmering with that oily living sheen. They moved as though they were not machines, but predators, each one alive, each one hungry. The Battle of Helios had begun. And this time, humanity refused to scatter. Fleets surged forward, human vessels moving in desperate, chaotic formations. They were outmatched in size, in speed, in power, but not in will. The first volleys tore through the void. Alien beams sliced apart frigates, reducing them to molten fragments. But human ships struck back, unleashing torrents of missiles and railgun fire. The void bloomed with fire as explosions rippled across alien hulls. For the first time, something changed. An alien cruiser took a direct hit from a barrage of rail slugs, its shimmering armor shattering in a spray of molten shards. The Great Crescent shuddered, its movements faltering, and then, unthinkably, it broke apart, its living hull screaming in silence as it burned. Cheers erupted across human comms. They could be killed. It was not a rout. It was not even close to victory. But for the first time since Ararat, humanity fought not as prey, but as defiant prey that bit back. The battle raged for hours. Helios Station itself shook as alien weapons hammered at its shields. Entire districts fell dark as power grids collapsed. Still the defenders fought, throwing themselves into the void again and again. When the dust finally settled, Helios still stood. Half its spires had been reduced to slag, its docks were littered with the wreckage of ships, and its dead numbered in the tens of thousands. But it still stood, and humanity had learned something precious in the fire. The enemy could bleed. Word spread faster than light. Across the colonies, the story of Helios ignited sparks of hope. The aliens were not gods. They were not invincible. Humanity had struck them down, and humanity would strike again. In the ashes of fear, a new fire was kindling. The galaxy had wanted humanity silent, forgotten, erased. Instead, it had given them something else entirely, a reason to fight. The wreckage of the battle still drifted around Helios Station weeks after the fighting ended. Shattered hulls spun slowly in the void, some still venting frozen trails of atmosphere. The corpses of vessels, both human and alien, had become a graveyard in orbit, silent witnesses to the defiance that had been carved into the stars. For the first time, humanity possessed something it had not before: alien wreckage. Recovery teams moved cautiously, their small craft buzzing like insects around the carcasses of crescent warships. The alien vessels resisted even in death. Their hulls twitched, as though alive, sloughing off fragments that floated into the void like shedded skin. But scientists and engineers were relentless. They cut, welded, and pried, dragging alien shards back to Helios for study. The findings sent shivers down every spine. The alien metal was not metal in the way humans understood it. It was a lattice of living cells, hardened into a chitinous armor that pulsed faintly with bioluminescent veins. When pierced, it secreted a gel that hardened instantly, sealing breaches. Even dead, the material fought to repair itself, twitching against the blades of human saws. Weapons experts pored over captured fragments of alien cannons. They discovered that the devastating beams which had sliced through human ships were powered by siphoning energy from pocket singularities, tiny black holes stabilized in containment fields. The precision required was beyond anything humanity had mastered, but the most shocking revelation was the neural lattice. The alien ships were not piloted in any way humans recognized. Instead, they were extensions of their crew. The vessels themselves were alive, bonded to their operators through a vast shared consciousness. Every maneuver, every shot, every coordinated strike had been born from that link. It explained the aliens' unity. It explained their speed. It explained their arrogance. And it gave humanity a path forward. Captain Elias Vera found himself drafted into endless councils in the aftermath of Helios. He had no taste for politics, but he understood why he was there. His survival of Ararat and his leadership during the station's defense had made him a symbol, something humanity desperately needed. The chambers of Helios were crowded with scientists, admirals, engineers, and politicians. Maps of the colonies flickered above the round table, glowing red where alien fleets had struck, glowing blue where humanity still held. "We cannot outmatch them ship for ship," said Admiral Tarsa, her voice sharp and uncompromising. "We lack the industrial base. We lack the technology. If we try to fight them as they fight us, we will be erased." "Then how do we survive?" a governor demanded. "By being human," Elias said quietly. The words drew startled glances, but he did not waver. "They fight as one mind. That is their strength, but it is also their weakness. They are predictable. They move as a tide. We are not bound like that. We are individuals, unruly, uncoordinated, unstable." The council erupted in murmurs. Elias continued, "We can adapt. They cannot. We can take their weapons, their armor, their tactics, and twist them into something they will not expect. If we fight on their terms, we lose. If we fight on ours, we can win." The months that followed became an age of furious innovation. Engineers in the shipyards of Titan learned to graft fragments of alien armor onto human hulls, creating patchwork vessels that bled and twitched, but could survive blows that once would have split them in two. On Mars, scientists reverse-engineered the singularity chambers, not to replicate them, too unstable, too dangerous, but to build countermeasures. They discovered ways to flood the battlefield with gravitic distortions, disrupting the aliens' weapons long enough for human ships to close the distance. Fighters were retrofitted with crude energy siphons, allowing them to leach power from alien beams and channel it back into their own shields. Soldiers developed boarding tools designed to pierce the organic layers of alien hulls and inject corrosive nanites. And through it all, humanity learned one lesson again and again. Creativity was their greatest weapon. The aliens never adapted. Their tactics remained unchanged, their ships uniform, their strategies rigid. They relied on the crushing weight of their superiority. Humanity, out of desperation, invented madness. The first proof came at Vega's Rift. A fleet of 30 alien warships descended upon the system, intent on wiping out the last human stronghold there. They were met by only 12 human vessels. The aliens advanced confidently, their crescents gleaming in the dark. but the humans did not fight fair. At the opening volley, half the human fleet dove straight into the rift, a tangled web of electromagnetic storms and gravitational shears. It was suicide by every tactical manual ever written. The aliens followed, expecting an easy slaughter. Inside the storm, chaos ruled. Human ships twisted and rolled through gravitational eddies, their patched hulls flexing with alien tissue. Alien beams fired wildly, bent aside by gravitational interference. Human vessels struck from impossible angles, their weapons augmented by captured alien tech. A frigate named Aurora rammed an alien cruiser head-on, latching on with magnetic clamps. Its crew unleashed a swarm of corrosive nanites that ate through the alien hull like fire through dry wood. The cruiser screamed in silence, its bioluminescent veins going dark one by one before it ruptured from within. When the battle ended, 6 human ships had been lost, but 10 alien warships burned in the rift, their remains devoured by the storms. Humanity had faced the enemy on impossible ground and triumphed. The news spread like wildfire. For the first time, the galaxy did not whisper only of humanity's destruction. It whispered of their defiance, of their cunning, of their unshakable refusal to kneel. Stories grew larger in the telling, of pilots who rode lightning storms to strike alien vessels, of soldiers who boarded enemy ships and carved their way through chitinous halls, of colonies that fought tooth and nail with mining lasers and atmospheric drones until the aliens withdrew. The enemy had thought humanity fragile. Instead, they had discovered something far more dangerous. They had discovered that humans learned, but victory had its price. Every battle left colonies gutted, fleets crippled, populations reduced to ash, resources stretched thin, fear gnawed at the edges of every triumph. Children were born beneath the shadow of war, their lullabies drowned out by distant bombardments. And still the aliens came, relentless, tireless, unyielding. Elias Vera stood on the bridge of his rebuilt Resolute, now clad in alien plating that pulsed faintly like a second skin. He looked out at the stars, each one a battlefield yet to come. "Let them come," he murmured. "We will teach them what it means to fight humanity." The fire in his eyes was no longer just defiance. It was hunger. The war had changed. Humanity was no longer prey. They were becoming predators. Victory was intoxicating, but it was never free. The stories of Vega's Rift, of Helios Station, of desperate fleets clawing victory from impossible odds spread like fire across human space. For the first time since Ararat had burned, hope shone in the eyes of colonists and soldiers alike. But the flame of hope demanded fuel, and that fuel was blood, steel, and sacrifice. Every victory cost lives measured not in dozens, but in thousands. Fleets returned from battle missing half their number. Colonies that held out long enough to repel the invaders did so by torching their own cities, leaving smoking craters where once children had played. The price of resistance was survival, but survival came at the expense of everything else. Humanity was winning battles. But humanity was also bleeding out. On Luna, beneath the domes of the capital, the United Assembly met in a session that lasted for 5 straight days. The chamber was filled with a tension thicker than smoke. Holographic projections of the colonies flickered overhead, vast star maps scarred with red. Admirals demanded more ships. Governors begged for protection. Scientists pleaded for more resources to continue their frantic work on alien technology. Every faction shouted until the chamber shook with the sound of desperation. At the heart of the storm stood Elias Vera, summoned once again not as a captain but as a symbol. He hated the role, but he played it because someone had to. "They are not endless," Elias said, his voice calm in the din. "Every battle we fight, every ship we destroy, it weakens them. But if we fracture, if we allow ourselves to splinter, we will fall. We must hold together or nothing else matters." A senator sneered across the chamber. "And what of the colonies that cannot be saved? Do we leave them to burn for the sake of unity?" Elias met his gaze. "We save who we can, we fight where we must. And we remember that every drop of blood spilled has to buy us something greater than grief. If not, then yes, we are already lost. The words silenced the chamber. No one spoke again for a long time. The price of defiance was clearest at Tiberian. Tiberian was a lush frontier world, its surface thick with rainforests and oceans that glittered like polished jade. It was a place where settlers had hoped to build paradise. Instead, it became a battlefield. When the alien fleet descended, the defenders of Tiberian had only a handful of warships and a scattering of orbital platforms. They fought anyway, throwing themselves into the storm to buy their people time. The skies burned for 3 days. By the fourth, the defenses were gone. The invaders descended to the surface. For the first time, humanity saw how they waged war on the ground. Their soldiers were not individuals, but extensions of the ships above, towering creatures of sinew and chitin, their limbs ending in bladed growths, their eyes glowing with that same bioluminescent pulse. They moved with the same eerie unity, flowing across the forests like a swarm. The people of Tiberian met them with rifles, artillery, and fire. Farmers became soldiers. Miners detonated their own tunnels to bury the enemy. Entire villages armed themselves with crude weapons, fighting until their last breath. The forests became a nightmare of burning trees, screaming alien warforms, and human blood soaking into the soil. When reinforcements finally arrived weeks later, they found nothing but ashes. Of the millions who had lived on Tiberian, fewer than 20,000 remained. The aliens had been driven back. But at what cost? The survivors wept not with joy, but with rage. It was the same everywhere. Humanity's victories came at the edge of annihilation. Each time they struck back, they paid in burned cities and shattered lives. But with each battle, the invaders changed, not in their tactics, not in their arrogance, but in their attention. Where once they had ignored humanity as little more than pests, now they began to focus. Their fleets grew larger, their strikes more vicious. It was no longer extermination at the edges of space. It was a war of fury. They had underestimated humanity, and in their fury, they made the same mistake again. Elias Vera felt the price of defiance most keenly on his own ship. The Resolute had been reforged a dozen times over, a patchwork of human steel and alien flesh. Its corridors echoed with the footsteps of new recruits, most barely out of adolescence. His original crew was gone, each name a scar etched into his memory. One night, as the ship coasted silently between systems, Elias walked the memorial wall. Hundreds of names lined the steel, carved by hand with whatever tools the crew had found. Sarai Nadia, his first officer, found him there. Her face was as worn as his own, her eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. "They are just children," she whispered, watching the latest recruits spar in the training hall beyond the glass. "We are sending them into hell." Elias nodded. "We always have. The difference is that now we know the cost." Sarai turned to him. "How much more can we pay before there is nothing left of us?" Elias did not answer, because he did not know. The price of defiance was written in fire across the stars, but it was also written in resolve. For every colony that burned, another dug in deeper. For every fleet shattered, another rose from the shipyards. For every child orphaned, a soldier swore vengeance. Humanity was being tempered, beaten and hammered and reforged in the furnace of war, and with each strike, with each loss, the steel grew harder. The invaders had thought to break them with terror. Instead, they had given them purpose. And that purpose was simple. Humanity would endure, humanity would fight, and humanity would never again kneel to anything in the stars. For months, humanity had fought with its back against the wall, defending colony after colony, holding the line through sheer willpower and the brutal cunning of desperation. Every battle had been a test of survival, every victory a miracle paid for in grief. But after Tiberian, after the forests burned and the survivors staggered from the ash with nothing left but fury, the war changed. The question was no longer how long humanity could endure. The question became, how far were they willing to go? The first whispers of taking the fight to alien space came from the soldiers themselves. They had seen too many worlds reduced to rubble, too many comrades die screaming beneath alien fire. They hungered for retribution. The idea spread quickly to the admirals and scientists, to governors who had buried their own children. Humanity was tired of being prey. If the aliens could blade, then it was time to strike their heart. It was not an easy decision. Humanity's fleets were still outnumbered, their technology still a patchwork of stolen secrets. The enemy's home territory was a mystery wrapped in shadow, but the will was there, and where there was will, humanity always found a way. The plan was born at the Titan shipyards, in the cold dark where warships rose from scaffolds like iron giants. They called it Operation Furnace. It would be the first true counteroffensive. Elias Vera and the Resolute were chosen to spearhead it, not because the ship was the strongest, but because its crew had become legends. Survivors of Ararat, defenders of Helios, veterans of Vega's Rift. They carried with them the weight of every scar, and that weight had become a weapon. When Elias received the orders, he stood in silence on the bridge, staring at the flickering star map projected before him. A line of human space in blue, a gulf of unknown territory beyond it, and deep within that gulf, a single red marker, an alien staging ground identified from fragments of captured data. It was not the heart of the enemy, but it was a throat worth striking. Sarai Nadia leaned on the console beside him, her arms crossed. So we are not just surviving anymore, we are hunting. Elias nodded. If we do this right, the galaxy will know. If we do it wrong, she finished for him. Then humanity burns. The fleet assembled quietly away from the crowded hubs of the colonies. 20 ships in total, patchwork creations of human steel and alien grafts, bristling with experimental weapons and untested technologies. Some captains prayed before departure. Others drank until their hands stopped shaking. Elias said nothing at all. He knew there was no prayer strong enough, no drink deep enough, to wash away the fire they were walking into. The Resolute led the way, its alien plating pulsing faintly in the starlight. Behind it, the fleet slipped into the dark, engines flaring as they crossed the line humanity had never before dared. Into alien space. The difference was immediate. The void itself felt hostile. Distortions warped sensors, as though the very fabric of space bent differently here. Strange signals whispered across comms, unintelligible but heavy with intent. Shattered remnants of other species, vessels drifted in the dark, evidence that humanity was not the first to face these enemies, only the latest. The fleet pressed on, days bled into weeks. The strain was immense. Every jump could have revealed a waiting ambush. Every silence could have hidden a fleet ready to descend. Crews slept in their armor, weapons always within reach. The tension grew so thick it was suffocating, and then they found it. The staging ground. It was not a planet, not in the sense humanity knew. It was a world of bone and metal fused together, a great sphere wrapped in living structures that pulsed like organs. Vast towers of chitin rose into the void, connected by web-like bridges of sinew. Around it orbited dozens of crescent warships, their hulls glimmering as though they were extensions of the world itself. The sight froze every heart. It was not just a base, it was a nest, and humanity was about to set it on fire. The opening strike was brutal. Human ships dropped from warp on the far side of the alien world, unleashing volleys of missiles and rail slugs before the defenders could react. Explosions tore across the organic towers, sending gouts of flame and ichor into the void. Alien warships surged to intercept, but the fleet pressed forward, engines screaming. The battle that followed was chaos incarnate. Alien vessels moved in perfect unity, swarming the humans like a tide. Human ships fought in fragmented packs, darting in and out, striking from angles no single-mind coordination could predict. The Resolute dove through the wreckage, its railguns hammering against alien armor, its grafted plating shimmering with borrowed strength. Elias shouted orders as the ship bucked under impact after impact, his crew fighting not with precision but with raw instinct. At the heart of the battle, human boarding teams launched. Small, fragile craft rammed into the alien towers, cutting their way inside with plasma torches. Soldiers stormed through halls of flesh and bone, their rifles blazing as alien defenders swarmed them. The fighting was close, brutal, and merciless. One squad reached the core of a tower, a pulsating organ the size of a cathedral. They rigged it with explosives and fought their way back through waves of shrieking alien warforms. The detonation ripped through the tower, tearing a hole in the world itself. The humans pressed harder. By the time the fleet pulled away, the staging ground was in ruins. Half its towers burned, its defenses shattered, its orbit littered with the corpses of alien vessels. Humanity had not merely survived in enemy territory, they had triumphed. The price was staggering. Of the 20 ships that entered alien space, only 11 returned. Thousands of soldiers never came back from the towers. The Resolute itself was so battered that its hull seemed held together by little more than stubbornness. But none of that mattered. For the first time in the war, humanity had struck not in defense, but in vengeance. For the first time, the aliens had felt the fire on their own soil. Word of the victory spread like thunder. Across human space, voices rose not in fear, but in battle cries. Recruitment surged. Colonies that had once cowered behind their walls now demanded to send fleets into the dark. The enemy had awakened something they could not control. They had awakened a predator. Elias stood on the bridge of the Resolute, staring at the stars ahead. The battle had left his ship scarred, his crew broken, his body weary beyond measure. And yet, as he looked into the void, there was no despair in his eyes, only resolve. "This is only the beginning," he murmured, because he knew the truth. The furnace had been lit, and humanity would burn the galaxy if it meant survival. The raid on the alien staging ground was remembered across human space as a turning point. It was no longer whispered whether humanity could survive. It was shouted that humanity could win. Shipyards roared to life, their furnaces glowing day and night. New vessels slid into the void, each one bristling with weapons that blended human ingenuity and alien grafts. Soldiers trained in brutal regimes, hardened by the memory of burned colonies. The colonies themselves rallied, sending resources, weapons, and recruits until every outpost in the stars pulsed with the rhythm of war. But victory bred a dangerous hunger. Human fleets pushed deeper into alien space. What had begun as raids became full offensives. Worlds of flesh and bone were torched, nests shattered, alien fleets scattered. Every battle was blood-soaked, every triumph costly, but still humanity surged forward. They had become addicted to defiance, and the enemy noticed. The counterblow came at Erythos. Erythos was not a colony, but a fortress world, an ancient rock carved into bunkers and weapon platforms, its orbit ringed with defensive stations. Humanity believed it unbreakable. Its defenses had been layered thick after the fall of Tiberian, its skies filled with fleets hardened by months of victory. If any place could hold, it was Erythos. When the alien fleet arrived, it dwarfed anything humanity had ever seen. Hundreds of crescents blotted the void, moving in flawless unity. The sky itself seemed to darken beneath their advance. The battle that followed was not a clash. It was an apocalypse. Human ships fought with the fury of wolves, darting in and out, tearing down alien vessels with cunning strikes. Boarding parties ripped into enemy hulls, detonating explosives deep within their cores. Erythos' surface cannons roared, hurling fire into the heavens until the very crust of the planet cracked. But the enemy had come prepared. New vessels joined their ranks, larger, darker, their hulls pulsing with veins of molten light. Their weapons tore through shields with ease, their beams carving entire fleets in half with single strikes. Against them, human tricks faltered. Erythos burned. For every alien ship that fell, 3 human vessels followed. For every tower of chitin shattered, a dozen bunkers crumbled beneath molten rain. The fortress world held for 5 days. On the 6th, its defenses collapsed. By the 7th, the surface was ash. Millions died. Humanity's pride was shattered. The message was clear. The enemy could adapt too. In the aftermath, despair threatened to return. Colonies whispered again of retreat, of the futility of resistance. Some leaders argued that the offensive had been a mistake, that humanity had gone too far into the furnace and awoken the full fury of the storm. Elias Vera sat in silence as those arguments raged. He had fought at Erithos. He had watched ships burn and comrades vanish in fire. He had seen the cost of overreach, but he had also seen something else. Even in the face of overwhelming force, humanity had not broken. Erithos had fallen, but it had taken hundreds of alien ships with it. The defenders had fought until there was nothing left to fight with, and even then, they had clawed at the enemy with their bare hands. That was not defeat, that was proof, and Elias knew what had to be done. The council met one final time. The chamber was heavy with grief, its walls echoing with the ghosts of Erithos. Holographic maps showed the spread of alien fleets, the scars of human losses, the fragile line between survival and extinction. "This war cannot continue," one governor whispered. "No," Elias said, rising to his feet. "It cannot, not like this." The chamber stilled. "We cannot match them in numbers. We cannot match them in power, but we do not need to. We do not need to bleed them forever. We need only one thing." His eyes burned as he spoke. "We need to break them once at their heart." A silence spread across the chamber, heavy as stone. "You are proposing suicide," Admiral Tarsus said at last. "I am proposing an ending," Elias answered. The plan that followed was madness. A fleet forged from the remnants of every ship humanity could muster, a coalition of survivors, veterans, and the untested young. Their target, the great world of bone and metal believed to be the enemy's central hive, identified through fragments of stolen memory and captured data. If humanity could strike it down, if they could shatter the heart of the enemy, the war would end. If they failed, humanity would end. As the fleet assembled, Elias stood on the scarred bridge of the Resolute. The memorial wall stretched behind him, every name carved into steel. He traced his fingers across the letters, feeling the weight of each life lost. Sarai Nadia joined him, her expression weary but unyielding. "You know this may be the end." Elias nodded. "Everything ends. But how it ends, that is what matters." She was silent for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Then let us make it an ending they will never forget." The fleet surged into the void, every engine blazing, every weapon primed. Soldiers whispered prayers, lovers exchanged final words, children who had never known peace clutched mementos of home. Humanity had placed everything on this last strike. The alien hive awaited them, a world of shadow and fire, pulsing with veins of molten light, its surface alive with billions of warforms. Around it circled fleets so vast they blotted out the stars. Elias Vera looked upon it and felt no fear, only fury, only resolve. "This is it," he said into the comms, his voice carrying across the fleet. "This is the day humanity ceases to kneel. Whatever happens here, let the galaxy remember, we fought, we endured, we were never broken." The fleet roared in answer, and then they charged. The human fleet fell upon the alien hive like a storm of fire. The first wave struck the outer defenses, shattering crescents and bone spires in explosions that lit the void like suns. Boarding pods slammed into enemy hulls, disgorging soldiers who fought through twisting corridors of living flesh, their rifles blazing as they carved a path of blood. The enemy responded with fury. Vast ships of pulsing light and bone surged forward, their beams carving through human vessels as if they were paper. Entire wings vanished in moments, their screams echoing across the comms. The battle was chaos, fire, and death, but it was not without design. Elias Vera had known they could not win through brute force. Their target was not victory in the void, but the heart of the hive itself. While fleets clashed in the heavens, the Resolute led a spearhead through the maelstrom, its alien grafts shielding it from the worst of the enemy's fire. Dozens of ships fell around it. Still, the Resolute pressed on. "Forward," Elias roared, his voice carrying above the alarms and screams. "Do not break. This is the end, one way or another." The alien hive loomed before them, its surface writhing with towers of chitin and rivers of molten light. Beneath the layers of flesh and stone lay the great mind that had driven the war, the core intelligence that bound the enemy into one will: destroy it and the Unity would fracture. The Resolute plunged into the atmosphere, its hull tearing apart as it fought through storms of fire and claw. Its guns roared until they were silent, its shields burned until they were gone. Still, it dove. At last, it struck the surface like a hammer. The impact split the ground, tearing open the hive's veins. From the wreckage poured human soldiers, their boots sinking into rivers of alien ichor. They fought through endless tunnels, every wall alive with writhing flesh. Alien warforms surged from the darkness, their bladed limbs slicing through human lines. For every step forward, 100 bodies fell. Still, humanity pressed on. At the front strode Elias Vera, his rifle empty, his blade slick with ichor. Sarai Nadia fought at his side, her armor shattered, her eyes burning with unyielding fire. They reached the core. It was vast, a cathedral of pulsing light and sound, a living engine of thought and will. The air itself seemed to resist them, pressing against their lungs, clawing at their minds. The great intelligence stirred, and its voice filled their skulls, a chorus of contempt, rage, and fear. You are nothing, you are ash, you will kneel. Elias raised the detonator, his voice was steady. No, we rise. He pressed the trigger. The charges planted along the tunnels ignited, fire ripping through the hive. The core screamed, its light shattering into darkness. The world convulsed, tearing itself apart as the unity that bound the enemy unraveled. In orbit, alien fleets faltered. Their perfect coordination collapsed, ships colliding, warforms turning upon one another. Human vessels seized the moment, cutting through the chaos with vengeance and fury. The hive burned, and with it, the war ended. Epilogue: centuries later, time is a patient sculptor. Centuries after the hive burned, the galaxy was no longer the same. The scars of the war remained, ruined worlds, drifting husks of ships, monuments carved into stone where cities once stood. But from those scars had grown something greater. Humanity had spread, not in fear, but in strength. New colonies thrived, their skies filled with vessels that bore both steel and bone, the legacy of their enemy reshaped into tools of creation. Children studied the war not with sorrow, but with pride. They called it the Age of Ashes, the time when humanity had been tested, when they had faced annihilation and endured. And in the great capital on Luna, beneath a dome of crystal that looked upon the stars, stood the Memorial Hall. At its center towered a single monument, a wall of steel, upon which were carved the names of every soul who had fallen in the war. Millions of names etched into eternity. Pilgrims came from every world to touch the wall, to whisper their thanks, to remember. Among the names was Elias Vera. His story was told in every corner of human space, not as the tale of a man who won a war, but as the story of a people who refused to kneel. His last words echoed still, carved above the monument in letters that gleamed in the starlight. We rise. And so humanity had. From the weight of ashes, they had risen. And nothing in the galaxy would ever again dare to forget it.